When I walked into the courtroom that morning, both my mom and dad rolled their eyes like I was the family embarrassment come to ruin their perfect image. But when the judge looked up and recognized me, his jaw literally dropped. That was the first sign this wasn't going to go the way my parents expected. I used to think family meant protection. That blood meant loyalty. But sitting there, in that cold courtroom air that smelled of paper, perfume, and power, I realized something brutal: family can be your sharpest weapon, or your deepest wound. My name is Lena Carter, 24, law student turned legal intern until my life derailed. My parents, Edward and Claire Carter, were the kind of people who lived for reputation. Dad, a polished attorney who never lost a case. Mom, a socialite who smiled like every camera in the world was on her. And me? I was the quiet one. The mistake child who didn't fit the Carter mold. At least, that's what they made me believe. When I got into law school, they told everyone it was cute. When I landed an internship at one of the top firms in the city, they called it luck. And when I told them I wanted to help people, not corporations, they laughed. Lena, the world doesn't need more idealists, Dad had said, swirling his scotch. Maybe focus on finding a husband before you start saving the world, Mom added with a smirk. But that was before their scandal started. It began 6 months ago, when I accidentally found something I wasn't supposed to. I'd stopped by Dad's home office to print a paper. His desk was covered in case files, contracts, and one USB drive. It wasn't labeled, which of course made me curious. When I plugged it into my laptop, the folder opened instantly, no password. Inside were dozens of confidential financial records. Payments, transactions, and off-the-books consulting fees. At first, I thought it was a client's. But when I saw my dad's signature, and my mom's name linked to a charity fund that didn't exist, my stomach dropped. They weren't just bending the law. They were breaking it. Worse, they were profiting off victims. Fake donations, redirected settlements, manipulated case outcomes. All neatly documented, like they were daring someone to catch them. And when I did, they caught me right back. I'll never forget that night. The confrontation. The shouting. You had no right to go through my files. Dad roared, slamming his hand on the desk. You don't understand the world yet, Mom hissed. This is how success works. But I did understand. Too well. I'd spent years studying justice, ethics, and law. And now, my own parents were proof that the system could be played like a game. They made me swear to stay quiet. They said it would ruin the family name. They said no one would believe me anyway. And for a while, I didn't say a word. But silence rots the soul. The turning point came when one of Dad's clients, an elderly man suing a pharmaceutical company, suddenly dropped his case. He'd trusted my father. I'd worked with him personally. He died 3 weeks later. The settlement money vanished. And the fake charity my mother ran got a mysterious donation of the exact same amount. That was the night I started collecting my own evidence. Screenshots. Bank transfers. Recordings. Every lie they told, I saved. Every threat, I documented. They thought I was still the obedient daughter. The one who stayed quiet at dinners, smiled for pictures, and didn't question their business trips. But I was building something behind that silence, a case. When I finally went to the authorities, I didn't tell them who my parents were. I just handed over the files and walked away. But when the investigation became public, when the Carters made the front page for suspected embezzlement and fraud, my phone started ringing non-stop. They called me a traitor. They said I'd destroyed everything. They didn't know the half of it. And that brings us to this morning. The courtroom is packed. Reporters line the hallway, flashes going off like fireworks. Mom sits next to Dad, perfectly styled, pretending she's the victim. Dad's lawyer, his best friend, leans in, whispering strategies. Then the bailiff announces, the witness may enter. Every head turns as I step through the double doors. Mom rolls her eyes dramatically. Dad shakes his head like I'm a child throwing a tantrum. But the judge, an older man with sharp eyes, stiffens. He knows me. I interned under him last year. Ms. Carter, he says slowly, surprise etched in his voice. You're the witness. I nod once. The silence that follows feels like a storm about to break. Because no one in that courtroom knows what I'm about to reveal. Not yet. But they will. Looking back, the signs had always been there, I just didn't want to see them. For most of my life, I thought my parents were simply strict, demanding perfectionists who pushed me because they wanted the best. But somewhere between their smiles and their scolding, there were cracks, small, sharp red flags that only made sense years later, sitting in that courtroom. The first one was money. I was 18 when I overheard my parents arguing about it. It was past midnight, and their voices slipped under my bedroom door like smoke. We can't keep moving funds like this, Claire, my dad snapped. Relax, Mom hissed back, You worry too much. Edward, this is control, not theft. At the time, I didn't understand. I thought it was about bills or taxes or one of Dad's firm cases. I remember closing my laptop, listening harder, but all I caught were half sentences: transfer, client, foundation. When I asked Mom about it the next morning, she smiled that rehearsed socialite smile and said, "Sweetheart, adults argue about boring things. Don't worry your pretty little head." That should have been my first clue. Then came favoritism, the kind that cuts you quietly. I had an older brother, Ryan, the golden child. The one who followed in Dad's footsteps, joined his firm, wore the same brand of suits, and even laughed the same way. At every dinner, Dad would brag about him. "Ryan closed another client today," he'd say proudly, while I sat beside them, pushing food around my plate. "He's got that Carter charm," Mom added. "You could learn something from him, Lena." It was like they wanted two Ryans and somehow got stuck with me. Ryan, of course, noticed. He liked it that way. He'd smirk every time I tried to speak at the table, as if to remind me that my words didn't carry weight here. But the strangest thing was how close he and Dad became after college. They had secret meetings, late-night calls, trips for business. Whenever I asked where they were going, the answers were vague. "Don't worry about it, Lena," Ryan would say, smirking. "You wouldn't understand." He was right, I didn't. Not until much later. By my third year of law school, I started noticing other details that didn't fit. My parents suddenly had more. A new vacation house. Designer furniture. My mom flashing diamond earrings that could pay my tuition twice over. But neither of them had taken on new clients, or so they said. When I asked where the money came from, Dad said, "Good investments." When I pressed, Mom smiled and said, "Marry rich, and you'll never have to ask that question." I laughed then, but it sat wrong in my chest. Because while they were buying mansions, I was scraping by, juggling internships and night classes. Every month I'd ask for help with rent, and every time they said, "You need to learn responsibility." Ryan never had that problem. He drove a new car every year. His name was suddenly on company property. That's when I started watching. Listening. The next red flag came wrapped in family dinners. Dad always invited his important clients, wealthy people with fake smiles and empty laughs. They'd toast to success, talk about charity, and boast about helping the less fortunate. But one night, I noticed something strange. A man named Mr. Grayson, an older client, mentioned a legal settlement. "I just wired the final payment to your charity," he said. Dad smiled and nodded. Mom squeezed his hand. But I'd reviewed that same case at my internship. There wasn't supposed to be a settlement. It had been dismissed. After the dinner, I asked my dad about it. "You must have misunderstood," he said too quickly, avoiding eye contact. "No, Dad, I read the file." "Lena." His voice went cold. "Don't talk about things you don't understand." And that was that. But that night, lying awake in my room, I couldn't shake it. Mr. Grayson's words, Dad's tone, Mom's fake smile, it all felt rehearsed, like they were in on something I wasn't supposed to see. By the time I got my internship under Judge Whitmore, the same judge who'd recognized me in the courtroom years later, I was already carrying doubts like stones in my pocket. Judge Whitmore was kind but sharp. He taught me to question everything. To never take official documents at face value. One afternoon, while helping him organize old case files, I stumbled upon something that froze me in place: Carter vs. Hemsworth, a lawsuit my father had won 5 years earlier. Except according to the court's digital record, the case had been quietly withdrawn, not resolved. That wasn't supposed to be possible. When I mentioned it casually to Dad over dinner that night, he dropped his fork. "Just for a second, but I saw it." "That case is closed," he said flatly. "Don't bring it up again." Then Mom changed the subject, asking Ryan about his new client. And just like that, the conversation vanished. But my unease didn't. I started noticing patterns. The same clients donating to Mom's charity after winning suspiciously favorable cases. Dad deleting emails when I walked in. Mom taking late-night calls from numbers saved as board member number 3 or accountant number 4. It all felt connected like a web spun just out of sight. But the biggest red flag wasn't about money. It was about trust. Because one evening, when I came home early from my internship, I heard my mom whispering on the phone. "She's getting too curious." "No, not yet. Edward said he'd handle it." When she saw me standing there, her face went pale. Then the smile returned, too quickly. "Lena, darling. Didn't hear you come in." She hung up before I could ask who she'd been talking to. That was the night I started locking my door. And for the first time, I began to wonder not if my parents were hiding something, but what they were hiding from me. Some betrayals you can sense before they happen, like thunder rumbling before a storm. But others? They sneak up on you quietly, disguised as love. When I uncovered what my parents had done, I didn't just lose faith in them. I lost faith in everything I thought family meant. It started the night I found the USB drive. Dad had gone on one of his business trips with Ryan, and Mom was hosting another dinner for her charity donors. The house buzzed with laughter and the sound of wine glasses clinking, but I wasn't in the mood to play the perfect daughter. I slipped into Dad's office, the one room in the house that felt like a museum of secrets. The air was thick with cologne and old paper, the mahogany desk spotless except for a stack of case folders and a locked drawer. Dad never left anything unlocked. But that night, maybe he'd been rushed, maybe arrogant because the second drawer clicked open easily. Inside was the same black USB I'd seen months ago. Unlabeled. Ordinary. Except now, I knew better than to think anything in this house was ordinary. I pocketed it and went upstairs, locking my bedroom door. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. When I plugged it into my laptop, it opened instantly. There were folders labeled. Donor receipts. Transfers. Settlements. Assets_Ryan. Assets_Lena. Curiosity turned to dread. I opened Assets_Ryan. Dozens of documents appeared, bank accounts, shares, investments, all under Ryan's name. My parents' signatures appeared on every one, transferring millions into his accounts over the past few years. Then I opened Assets_Lena. My folder had only one file, closed. I clicked it. It was a notarized letter. Effective immediately, the inheritance previously allocated to Lena Carter has been dissolved. All family trust assets shall be consolidated under Ryan Carter's management. This decision reflects Lena's lack of commitment to the family's legal and business legacy. Signed, Edward and Claire Carter. I read it 3 times before I realized what it meant. They'd cut me out. Completely. They hadn't even told me. The charity, the firm, the inheritance, everything my grandparents built was now in Ryan's hands. And I'd been written out like I never existed. I wasn't just the disappointment. I was disposable. At first, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt crushed, my ears ringing. It wasn't about the money, it was what it proved. They hadn't raised me to love justice or truth or compassion. They'd raised me to stay small. To never question them. And when I did, they erased me. I sat there staring at the glowing screen, tears blurring the words. My hands shook as I opened more folders, financial transfers from clients, falsified charity receipts, settlements funneled into private accounts. But one file stopped me cold, Whitmore. Judge Whitmore. The man I interned for. Inside was a private email exchange between him and my father dated 3 years ago. My dad had bribed him. Not directly, but cleverly. Charity donations in exchange for favorable rulings. The same charity Mom ran. My stomach turned. The entire system I believed in, justice, law, fairness, it was all just another one of my father's games. I couldn't stop scrolling. Each document was another nail in the coffin of who I thought my parents were. Then I saw my name again on a different document. Carter Foundation Beneficiary Adjustment. It was a legal petition submitted by my parents themselves to remove me as a beneficiary from the family foundation on grounds of unethical conduct and emotional instability. They were framing me. That's why Mom had been whispering on the phone. That's why Dad had been nervous. They weren't hiding crimes from strangers. They were hiding them from me. Because I was the threat. I sat frozen for hours. I reread, I cried, I screamed into my pillow until my throat hurt. I wanted to confront them, but fear held me back. These weren't just my parents anymore, they were criminals, liars, manipulators. And if I accused them without proof, they'd destroy me first. I backed up everything on the USB, emailed copies to myself, and hid the drive under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing their voices echo in my head, Dad's cold logic, Mom's smooth manipulation. You don't understand the world yet. This is how success works. No. This was how betrayal worked. And I finally understood the truth. They hadn't rolled their eyes in that courtroom because they were embarrassed by me. They did it because they underestimated me. They thought I was still that naive daughter who'd stay quiet to protect them. But they had no idea what I was capable of when cornered. The next morning, I packed a bag and left home. No goodbye note. No message. Nothing. I moved into a friend's apartment near the courthouse where I worked. And every night, I studied the evidence, connecting dots, mapping transactions, tracing lies. Each discovery fueled something new in me, not just anger, but purpose. They'd spent years building their empire of deception. Now I was going to take it apart piece by piece. And when I walked back into that courtroom months later, with the world watching and the judge recognizing my face, it wouldn't be as their daughter. It would be as their witness. 4 weeks after finding that USB drive, I lived like a ghost, half afraid, half awake. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was them. Every car that slowed near the apartment made my heart stop. The truth had gutted me. I wasn't just betrayed. I'd been deleted, written out of my own family's legacy like I never mattered. But grief only lasts so long before it turns into something else. It began with an email. One morning, I opened my laptop to find a message from my law school advisor, Professor Hayes. He was one of the few people I still trusted. The subject line read: "You've been mentioned in a legal dispute, call me immediately." My pulse spiked. When I called, his tone was hesitant. "Lena, I don't know how to tell you this, but your father submitted a complaint to the ethics board. He claimed you accessed his private case files without authorization during your internship." I felt the blood drain from my face. That was the final blow. They weren't content with cutting me out, they were destroying my reputation too. If that complaint went through, I could lose my license before even earning it. Everything I'd worked for would be gone. And that's when something in me snapped. That night, I sat in the dark with the USB drive clutched in my hand, staring at my reflection in the window. My eyes were red, tired, and hollow, but behind them, I saw something new. Not fear. Not pain. Fire. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter begging to be believed. I was the witness to a crime, and I was done staying quiet. My parents had spent years teaching me how to read contracts, interpret loopholes, understand systems of power. Ironically, they trained me for this. "You win cases," Dad once told me, "by knowing how people think before they act." Fine. Then I'd think like them just long enough to outplay them. The next morning, I went to see Judge Whitmore. When he opened his office door, he looked surprised. "Lena? You disappeared after the internship ended. Everything all right?" I hesitated before answering. "That depends on how you define all right." Over coffee, I told him everything. The forged documents. The charity scam. The fake settlements. Even the bribery email I'd found with his name in it. For a moment, his expression darkened. "I know about the donation," he said finally. "But I didn't know what it really was. I thought it was legitimate." "Your father made it sound like philanthropy, not payment." I nodded. "I believe you. But they used your name to cover it up. And if they've done that to you, they've done worse to others." He leaned back, studying me. "You're saying you have proof?" I placed the USB on his desk. "Enough to bury them." He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at me with a mix of sadness and respect. "You understand what this means, Lena? If you go through with this, your parents won't just lose their reputation. They'll lose everything. Their firm. Their freedom. Possibly your brother too." My throat tightened. For a moment, my heart ached at the thought. Despite everything, a small part of me still wanted them to love me. Still wanted to believe they'd apologize, say it was all a misunderstanding. But then I remembered that file closed. The one where they erased me like I was nothing. I straightened my shoulders. They made that choice. Now I'm making mine. The following days blurred together into quiet, controlled chaos. I began working secretly with the federal investigation team Judge Whitmore connected me with. They assigned me a contact, a forensic accountant named Ava Pierce, to trace the Carter family's financial trail. We met in diners and hotel lobbies, swapping encrypted drives and coded emails like something out of a spy movie. Ava was sharp and relentless. "Your parents have been laundering settlement funds for at least 6 years, she told me after their first audit. But they got sloppy recently. Too many shell companies. Someone's panicking." "Dad," I said quietly. "He's good at manipulation, not fear." She smirked. "Then we'll make him afraid." Every night, I went home exhausted but alive in a way I hadn't been in months. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It wasn't something chasing me anymore. It was something I carried forward. I realized revenge wasn't about rage. It was about justice. The same justice they mocked me for believing in. But beneath the fire, I still felt that sting of grief. There were moments I'd catch myself staring at old family photos, Mom's perfect smile, Dad's confident grin, Ryan's arm slung around my shoulder, and wonder how many of those smiles were lies. Maybe all of them. The final trigger came unexpectedly. I was sorting evidence files when I received a voicemail from my mother. Her tone was icy calm. "Lena, we know what you've done. You think you're clever, but you're just naive. This family built you, and we can unmake you. Stop before you regret it." I listened to it 3 times. Her words didn't hurt, they ignited. They weren't scared of losing their empire. They were scared of me. That was the moment my heartbreak died and my purpose was born. They'd tried to erase me from their story. Now I was going to make sure the whole world heard mine. I looked at the stacks of evidence, the dates, the transactions, the recordings, every secret they thought was buried. And I whispered to the empty room. "You taught me to fight like a Carter. You just never thought I'd use it against you. That was the night I stopped being their daughter. And became their reckoning. They always believed the best defense was a louder offense, charm, spectacle, money. I decided to use the opposite: silence, precision, and patience. Step 1. Lock everything down. Ava and I started by making a triplicate of the USB and burying copies in places no one would think to look: an encrypted cloud, a lawyer's safe deposit box, and with an investigator who specialized in whistleblower protection. We converted files into immutable forensic images so no one could accuse us of tampering. Every PDF, every bank transfer, every email had metadata preserved. They taught me to think like a prosecutor: dates, chain of custody, corroboration. Step 2. Map the web. We drew the Carter's empire on a whiteboard like a crime family tree: charities, shell companies, offshore accounts, trustee names. Ryan's name sat at the center of several ghost accounts. Mom's foundation was merely a pass-through. Mr. Grayson's settlement traced back through 3 intermediaries to an account in Ryan's name. Judge Whitmore's email didn't stand alone: it fit into a pattern of donations following favorable rulings. The web was ugly, but coherent. Patterns are the enemy of plausible deniability. Step 3. Corroborate victims. We found people Dad and Mom had used, former clients who'd been advised to drop suits, claim settlements, or accept consultations. Some were scared, some didn't know they'd been used. We gave them options: anonymity, protection, restitution through the investigators. One elderly woman, Mrs. Calloway, finally admitted her settlement vanished and that she'd been told to sign papers without counsel. Tears and trembling signatures made the ledger human. Every victim's story became a new strand in our net. Step 4. Make the villains feel safe. This was the hardest part emotionally. My parents needed to feel invincible. If they panicked too early, they would hide assets, burn documents, or silence people. So we fed them illusions. I let a few harmless rumors leak about a confused intern who might have misinterpreted files. I returned a message pretending to want reconciliation. Mom called, smiling, convinced I'd folded. She said things aloud in restaurants that I later replayed into evidence: how the foundation was untouchable, how Ryan handled the messy stuff. Their arrogance became a weapon: the more they flaunted, the more reckless their paper trail. Step 5. The bait. Ava engineered a fake final donation scenario. We set up a confidential agreement purportedly from a retiring client about a private settlement. We sent a secure, signed document asking for the charity to release an escrowed sum. The supposed donor, an actor working with the investigators under legal protection, called Dad's office, mentioned the name of a shell company only the Carters ever used. Predictably, Ryan took the call and bragged about the incoming transfer at dinner. They began moving funds, consolidating them into accounts we already had under surveillance. Step 6. Legal pressure points. Judge Whitmore and the investigators quietly filed subpoenas and freezing orders timed to coincide with the fake transfer. Ava and the forensic team had already secured provisional attachment on known accounts. We prepared declarative affidavits from Mrs. Calloway and 2 other victims. We had whistleblower testimony lined up and a paper trail that led directly to the Carters' signatures. The law loves certainty, so we created it. Step 7. Public narrative. I knew the court couldn't operate in a bubble: public pressure matters. But going public too soon could alert them. So we seeded a discreet tip to an investigative reporter who had beaten corporate corruption stories before. The article we arranged wouldn't run until the subpoenas were served. When it did, it would frame the legal motion already in the judge's hands: Carter family under federal investigation. They'd wake up to headlines and sealed court orders landing on their lawyers' desks. All the while, my parents strutted. Dad gave interviews about political witch hunts. Mom released a social media thread about family betrayal and a daughter gone rogue. They drew sympathy from polished acquaintances and donors who trusted the Carter brand more than facts. Ryan posted photos of his new investments. They were performers with a perfect cadence, too confident for their own good. But I wasn't immune to tremors. Every phone call from Mom tightened my chest. Every time Ryan smiled smugly across a table, I had to breathe and remember the whiteboard map, the victims' signatures, the time-stamped emails. Revenge is a series of small, controlled violences against the narrative your enemy lives in. It's not cathartic, it's methodical. Some nights I cried for the family I had lost, other nights I rehearsed how to speak in court like a lawyer, not a daughter. The final sequence clicked into place 3 days before the hearing. The fake donor made the transfer, Ryan moved the money, and our team executed the asset freeze. The subpoena arrived like a verdict: accounts inaccessible, property liens filed, board members deposed. For the first time in years, one of their accounts squealed and froze mid-transfer. On the morning the court date was announced, my parents held a press luncheon. Cameras flashed while they smiled with practiced grief, painting themselves as victims of a vindictive child. They believed they were still scripting the story. They were wrong. The judge's chambers would be full the next week: reporters, federal agents, victims, and me. Mom and Dad would walk into that courtroom thinking the show was theirs to command. Ryan would swagger at the front row, convinced his inheritance was untouchable. The only person who knew the exact timing of the asset freeze, the chain of transfers, and the victim's sworn statements was sitting on the other side of the aisle, calm, contained, and ready. I tightened my coat, slid the spare USB into my pocket, and walked to the courthouse steps. The world smelled like rain, the stairs felt like a stage. My hands were steady. My heart, quieter now, burned with a single thought. This is for every small voice they silenced. This is for the life they tried to erase. The courtroom doors opened. My parents smiled as if they'd already won. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, my parents rolled their eyes as if my very presence was an inconvenience, a stain on their perfect performance. They had no idea the show they were about to star in wasn't theirs. The cameras outside flashed like a storm. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, tension, and ego. Mom sat poised in a cream suit, her expression calculated grief. Dad's jaw was tight, polished arrogance barely concealing panic. Ryan sat behind them, scrolling his phone, pretending not to care. The courtroom buzzed. Everyone whispered about the Carters, how the powerful family had fallen victim to political games. Their lawyer, a man with a $5,000 tie and a smirk to match, whispered something to my father that made him chuckle. Then the bailiff announced, "Witness, Lena Carter." Every head turned. Mom's smirk twitched. Dad tilted his chin, dismissive. Ryan grinned like it was all an act. But when the judge lifted his gaze, Judge Whitmore, recognition and quiet astonishment flashed in his eyes. "Ms. Carter," he said slowly, "you may take the stand." The courtroom fell silent. I walked to the witness chair with steady steps. My palms were damp, but my heart was a metronome, calm, deliberate, relentless. Their lawyer started with the usual mockery. "Ms. Carter," he said with a polite sneer, "you've accused your own family of serious crimes. Surely this is emotional rather than factual." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the black binder in front of me. "I'll let the facts speak," I said evenly, and slid the first document to the clerk. The projector screen flickered to life, filling the courtroom with images of bank transfers, contracts, and fake charity receipts. Dad's smirk vanished. Mom's fingers tightened around her pearl necklace. "What exactly are we looking at?" the lawyer demanded. I looked straight at him. "The Carter Foundation's financial records," I said. "Specifically, the transfers that redirected charitable funds into private accounts belonging to Edward and Claire Carter and their son, Ryan." The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. The lawyer fumbled through his notes. "These documents are falsified. They're authenticated," I cut in. "Timestamped, verified, and traced by federal forensic analysts. If you'll allow me, I can demonstrate." Judge Whitmore gave a single nod. "Proceed." On the screen, I highlighted one document after another. The pattern unfolded like a puzzle, clicking into place, each piece a betrayal, each number a lie. "This transfer," I said, pointing, "was supposed to go to the Grayson Medical Fund, a settlement for cancer patients. It never arrived. Instead, it was rerouted through 3 shell companies and landed here." Another click. The audience gasped as Ryan's name appeared on the account statement. Mom's lips parted in shock, or was it fury? Dad leaned forward, eyes darting across the screen like he could rewrite the numbers with sheer denial. "Ms. Carter," the lawyer said sharply, "you have no right to access those files." "I do," I replied, voice steady. "Because those files were stored on a device registered under my name. The same device my father used to draft the legal amendment removing me from the family trust." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Is that true, Mr. Carter?" Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then came the second blow. "I also have signed testimonies from 3 former clients," I said, lifting another file. "Each of them transferred settlement funds under the pretense of legal fees. Each transfer was funneled into my mother's foundation. Those clients never saw a cent." I clicked play on the recording. Mrs. Calloway's trembling voice filled the room. "They told me it was for the children's hospital. I trusted them." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad muttered something under his breath, something that sounded dangerously close to turn it off. But the judge didn't. The entire courtroom watched as years of deceit unraveled, layer by layer. And then, the third and final strike. "Your Honor," I said softly, "there's one more file you should see." On the screen appeared the legal amendment, signed, sealed, and dated, the document that erased me from the family inheritance. "They removed me from the trust," I said, voice cracking for the first time. "Not because I was unfit. But because I found their crimes. They tried to silence me." I turned to my parents. "You didn't just betray the law. You betrayed your own blood." The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Judge Whitmore's expression hardened. He turned to the defense. "I've seen enough. I'm ordering an immediate audit and asset freeze pending trial. The lawyer stammered, but Whitmore raised his hand. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, you are hereby remanded for investigation under charges of embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Mom's perfect facade cracked. She stood abruptly, voice trembling with fury. Lena, you ungrateful little. Claire, Dad hissed, pulling her arm. But it was too late. Cameras caught everything her shouting, his cold glare, Ryan's stunned disbelief. The bailiffs approached. The courtroom doors opened again, and the press surged closer as the Carters were escorted out, handcuffs glinting beneath their tailored sleeves. Their lawyer shouted objections no one heard. And through the chaos, I sat still, tears stinging my eyes, not of sadness, but release. As they passed me, Mom glared. You ruined us. I met her eyes. No, I said softly. You ruined yourself. Dad paused long enough to whisper, you'll regret this. I smiled faintly. I already did. But now it's your turn. The bailiffs led them away. When the doors closed, the judge turned to me. Ms. Carter, he said quietly, that took courage. You didn't just testify, you restored the meaning of justice. I nodded, unable to speak. My hands shook as the courtroom emptied, reporters rushing outside to broadcast the downfall of the Carters, the once untouchable legal dynasty brought down by their own daughter. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my chest. They had rolled their eyes when I walked into the courtroom. But the world would remember the look on their faces when they walked out. It's strange how silence can feel louder than any argument. For years, my parents' voices had filled every room, commanding, judging, and belittling. But now, the halls of the Carter estate were quiet. Empty. Their portraits had been removed by court order, their names struck from charity boards, their bank accounts frozen. Mom and Dad were no longer the Carters that everyone bowed to. They were just inmate number 34,219 and number 34,220. 3 months after the courtroom explosion, their case became one of the most talked about legal downfalls in the state. News anchors dissected it every night. The Carters, once icons of law and luxury, exposed by their own daughter. Documentaries replayed the footage of Mom's breakdown and Dad's stunned face when the judge ordered their arrest. People called it the Carter collapse. Ryan disappeared from public view after pleading guilty to falsifying documents in exchange for leniency. Word was, he was working at a warehouse in another state far from the spotlight he used to crave. And me? I didn't run. I rebuilt. At first, I thought freedom would feel like revenge. But it wasn't. It was heavier. I inherited nothing except their debts and the remnants of our name. But somehow, that was enough. I rented a small apartment downtown and joined a legal reform nonprofit, the same one that had helped me verify the evidence. We fought for victims of financial fraud, the kind my parents had exploited. Every time I walked into our office, the irony hit me. A Carter, fighting against corruption. One evening, I found myself sitting across from Judge Whitmore again, this time, not as a witness, but as a guest speaker for his new justice initiative. Ms. Carter, he said with a faint smile, I never thought I'd see you here again. Not like this. Neither did I admitted. But maybe that's the point. He nodded. Sometimes the truth has to destroy you before it sets you free. That line stayed with me. Because it was true. A few months later, I received a letter from my mother. Written on prison stationery, her handwriting still perfect, her words sharp as ever. You've embarrassed this family beyond repair. Do you feel proud? I stared at that line for a long time before writing back. No, Mom. I don't feel proud. I feel clean. And I meant it. The final blow came when the state seized our family estate. The mansion was auctioned to pay restitution to the victims. On the day of the auction, I drove out there one last time. The once manicured lawns were overgrown. The fountain where I used to play as a child had cracked marble and empty basins. Reporters stood by the gates, eager to capture another headline. The daughter who brought down her dynasty. I stood still, watching as the gold-plated gates that once symbolized everything I wasn't good enough for, were taken down piece by piece. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to myself. You wanted a perfect family picture, Mom. Now the world has the full frame. Weeks later, I launched my own initiative, the Lena Project, a legal advocacy fund for whistleblowers and survivors of family financial abuse. Within a year, it gained national attention. I was invited on talk shows, podcasts, and university panels. People asked me, how did you stay strong when your own family betrayed you? And my answer never changed. Because blood may bind, but truth liberates. I visited my parents only once. It was visiting day at the Federal Correctional Facility. Mom avoided my eyes, her arrogance replaced by emptiness. Dad looked older, smaller, his voice stripped of authority. You wanted to destroy us, he said bitterly. No, I replied softly. I wanted to stop you. They said nothing after that. When the guard called time, I stood and looked through the glass one last time. You taught me the law, I said quietly. But you forgot justice. I didn't. Then I walked away, leaving them behind forever. The world moved on. People forgot the details, but they remembered one thing. That when the Carters rolled their eyes in court, the judge didn't see a foolish daughter. He saw a survivor who had turned betrayal into justice. And that's the poetic justice of it all. They spent their lives trying to look untouchable. But in the end, it was the daughter they underestimated who touched the truth and let it burn them alive. Direct to viewers. If you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, you're not alone. Sometimes, the ones who dismiss you today will one day have to face the truth you stood for. Have you ever exposed someone who thought they'd never be caught? Tell me in the comments, I read every one. And if you believe karma never misses its target, hit subscribe, because stories like this, they're just getting started.